Good morning. I'm Jane Young, and I have the pleasure of interviewing William Hubbard. Today's date is August 27th, 2024, and we are at the headquarters of the Nashville Bar Association. This interview is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. So let's begin. Bill, would you give us your full name, your date, and place of birth?
William Beasley Hubbard. I go by Bill. Born October 17th, 1946 in Jackson, Tennessee.
Okay, let's now discuss your family. Did you grow up in Jackson?
Yes, I grew up in Jackson. My father was a general surgeon. I had two brothers and a sister. My mother grew up in Nashville, and she was a Beasley. Her father, and her father started and owned Beasley Furniture Company that was at 3rd and Broad.
And that was located on Broadway.
Yes, Broadway, 3rd and Broadway, in Nashville. They had 4 buildings there. And after her father died, then she owned half of it, and her brother, whose name was Fred Beasley, owned half of it, and her brother ran the furniture store until his death.
You mentioned that your father was a general surgeon. Did he practice the entire time in Jackson?
Yes, other than in World War II, he was overseas. Basically treating the soldiers that were injured. And then he had graduated from Vanderbilt Medical School, and my mother, my oldest brother, were living here. When he came back to Nashville, I think the assumption was that he would practice here. But then one of his classmates in medical school contacted him and told him that Jackson needed a surgeon. So they moved to Jackson.
And where did your parents meet?
At Vanderbilt. My mother graduated from Vanderbilt undergraduate school, and they met at Vanderbilt in some social event.
Did your mother do any work outside of the home?
She did when my dad was overseas. Worked for some council person, but she didn't after they moved to Jackson.
All right. So she worked for the council person in Nashville.
Right.
And then when your father returned from overseas during World War II, at the end, when his time ended,
Right.
Then they came back. Your brother was already born, and they moved to Jackson.
Correct.
Now, you mentioned your siblings. Where do you fall?
I have a brother that's 4 years older than I, a brother that's a year younger, and my sister's 3 years younger.
Okay. tell us a little bit about your childhood in Jackson. Um, did you have hobbies? Where did you go to elementary school? Did you play sports?
Okay, I went to the Nashville Public Schools. I'm sorry, the Jackson Public Schools. Alexander was the elementary school, Tigard Junior High School, and then Jackson High School. And I think it was basically a pretty traditional small town. And then I went to Battleground Academy, BGA in Franklin, and boarded there my junior and senior year.
Okay, can you tell? That's interesting. Can you tell us why you and or your parents decided to have you board at Battleground Academy in Franklin?
Well, I was pretty unhappy at home, and there were strong personalities in my family, my dad and my brothers, and so we never really talked about it, but the effect was that it allowed me to develop as a person, and it sort of independent of my family, and it ended up being a very worthwhile experience.
Did you feel like in Jackson and with your family that you just sort of got lost in the family? Is that a way to describe it, or?
I think so. Plus, Jackson was a pretty small town at the time. Quite frankly, we were a prominent family, and I think to me, it was sort of, I think the effect was to stifle my growth.
Okay. I would imagine that you were a prominent family with your father being a physician.
Sure.
And typically physicians, particularly in a small town environment, particularly during that era, were renowned and considered important. Was your family involved in Jackson in any kind of community? Was he involved in the various clubs or?
My dad was the only board certified surgeon in what we refer to as rural West Tennessee, outside of the Memphis area. So it wasn't only Jackson, but all the small towns around Jackson. And my parents were involved in the normal social things with the country club and whatever. At the downtown Methodist Church, I think a pretty sort of normal situation.
Did you have any contact or experience with attorneys when you were in Jackson, lawyers?
Yes, I particularly knew my parents' friends, some of whom were lawyers. I think the one in Jackson that they were the closest with was a lawyer named Dick Nine, and who just sort of had a general practice there in Jackson. I keep saying that. But not a lot of contact with lawyers, I guess. I mean, Dad's associated were mainly with doctors.
So tell me about Battleground Academy, BGA.
Oh, it was a fascinating place. I'll tell you, it was interesting because I sort of, my mother took me to BGA, and I went up to my dorm room and sat on the bed and sort of thought, what do I do now? And
Did you have roommates?
I had a roommate. He had not shown up yet. He didn't last. He lasted maybe a week, maybe not. And so I picked up my tennis racket and walked out to the tennis courts. And frankly, from then on, I was fine. It was just, everybody was friendly, everybody was nice. BGA, I sort of, I was closest to the boarding students, obviously, not the day students. The day students sort of had a different life, mainly in Nashville. And the boarding students, there were, as I saw it, there were two groups. One were the boarding students who lived in the small towns around Nashville, and their parents wanted them to get a better education. And these were the better off families, and these guys would commute in on Monday morning and commute back home on Friday afternoon, and they were a great group of guys. And then there were the other guys that really didn't have any place to live. Parents didn't have a place for them or didn't want them around, and these guys were you had to watch out for these guys. They were not trustworthy, and
Were they troubled?
They were troubled, and they, they harassed the younger kids. They would, cheat in school. They were, so you had this sort of two groups. Luckily, I guess, the prevailing group were these solid guys from Lewisburg and Columbia and Pulaski and Sandoval.
Right. So just to clarify, at that time, BGA was an all-boys school.
Yes.
So moving forward, of course, they now have girls, and I don't think they have a boarding facility.
No, they don't.
So what were your extracurricular activities at Battleground?
Well, basically, I mean, I did have I was elected to some office. They had the typical, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, whatever. I tell you the truth, I can't even remember what my office was, but my mainly I did sports, and I was extremely busy. I football, wrestling, and track were the main sports that I did, and so I go to school in the morning, do the sports in the afternoon, study at night, and start all over again. and it was, I can remember on a Sunday, lying in my bed, listening to the radio, thinking, God, this is, I've never just thought of, sort of relaxed and not done anything. But, you know.
Did you have teachers, coaches that were influential there?
Oh, yeah, it was a good place. I mean, most of the teachers coached, because it was such a small thing. We had, 48 boys in my graduating
Wow.
class. And, so, and for the most part, the teachers were good. Of course, the classes were very small, and it provided an opportunity for a good education.
What about on the weekends? You mentioned that these people from small towns went home. What about you?
I typically would go home with them. So I met the other boarding students' families and got to know them, and they were, the families were wonderful and welcoming me, and I loved getting to know all these families, and I get to know their friends in these small towns and go to a dance or whatever. So it was an enjoyable experience.
Then let's move on to college. Where did you go to college?
I went to Rhodes College.
In Memphis?
Yes, it was
How did-
Southwestern in Memphis at the time.
And how did you choose Rhodes?
Well, I only applied to two schools, Swanee and Rhodes. My senior English teacher loved Swanee and steered students to Swanee, and but the Swanee at the time was a boys' school. The interstates had not been constructed, and I decided if I went to, I was coming out of a boys' school, high school. If I went to a boys' school's college, I was not going to be a very well-rounded person. So, and while at BGA, I experienced some blind dates and whatever. And so I truly went to Rhodes College because they had girls.
Did Rhodes have a religious affiliation?
It did, and it was strong. It was a Presbyterian school, and there were a lot of students whose parents who were ministers in Presbyterian churches. It had a strong theology department, and many of the students went into theology. Frankly, I thought the religious element of the school definitely contributed to the school. Plus, there was a requirement of 2 years of religion. So
2 years of what? I'm sorry.
of religion, or
Classes.
classes, 2 years. You had to take 2 years of religion. Now, the religion was, it went from everything from Bible to almost sociology or something. There was a wide range that you could take, but it was the teachers were very good.
So what did you major in?
I majored in psychology.
And when we talked before, you talked about some of the activities that you participated in. You were elected to office.
Yes, I, for my 4 years there, I participated in student government, and then my senior year, I was elected president of the student body, and I graduated in 1968, which was a very significant year as far as the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, the efforts at integration in Memphis, the association of MLK, and the fallout from that in Memphis. It was very chaotic and tense times.
And how did those times affect you and your involvement in campus activities?
Well, like today, it was defined a little differently, I guess, being at a school, but you had what I would call the liberal element, progressive element that wanted the student government involved in all kinds of national issues and whatever. And then you had the conservative element, which basically said, we didn't elect because of national issues, so they didn't want the student government taking positions on issues. And so I guess being a politician, even at the student level, I sort of took a middle of the road. If there was an issue that involved the students at Rhodes, then I had to try to get the government to take positions on it. If it didn't involve the students, then I would not take a position on it.
What would you say, what percentage of students were minority or African American?
Very small. I mean, there were African American students there. There were Asian American students there, but the numbers, it may have been
very small.
Yeah, 10 or something of each.
And you've mentioned an African American friend that you had, and y'all's interaction. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, he was not in my class, and he was, well, I talked about some of the progressive and the conservative. Well, he was constantly pushing me to be more on the progressive and come out with positions and whatever. So he forced me to justify if I wasn't going to address matters, and he was. But he and I had a rapport, and he certainly seemed to respect me. I respected him, and I enjoyed the interaction with him. And you want me to tell you what happened with him? Well, after Martin Luther King was assassinated, Memphis was a powder keg, and that basically closed down the city, closed all the liquor stores within 200 miles or something, and National Guard, and he vanished afterwards, and what I was told is that he died in the riots that took place after the assassination.
So obviously you never saw him
I
again,
never saw him again.
and there was never acknowledgement that really happened, or.
No. I mean, the school never commented, and so I never really got. But that's what I was told by other students.
So he had gone down there and participated, apparently.
Or he would have. That was his nature. Sure, he was in the middle of it.
So you've mentioned that Rhodes was a really formative experience for you. You had many friends. Can you tell us any teachers that were influential, or?
It was a very welcoming, supportive environment. I'm not sure I can point out any particular teacher, but the school made a huge effort towards bringing speakers and having debate over issues like the Vietnam War. They'd have a speaker pro and a speaker anti, and it felt like it was a safe place to explore the issue at the time. I mean, one of the speakers, just to give you sort of an idea, they had like the consulate, whoever it was from South Africa that spoke defending apartheid in South Africa. And, you know, at the time, students, I mean, it never crossed anybody's mind to object to this person speaking. I mean, that was just part of the culture. I mean, every viewpoint, every idea. So I can remember at the time before I heard him speak, thinking, how in the world is this guy going to defend South Africa? But anyway, I felt like it was a great place to be at the time.
Did you have, when you were at Rhodes, did you have an idea or that you would go to law school and become a lawyer?
Well, I must have. And I think in the process of dealing with the issues, the societal issues and those things at Rhodes, I must have had it in my mind, but I was going to Vietnam. There was I mean, my life was planned out for the next few years. You want me to go into what happened?
Sure.
Okay, well, I visited my selective service office with the death with the Jackson, and
People, this is during the era of Vietnam was still going on.
oh, it was huge. It was the peak of the war, and I thought they were great. I mean, there wasn't any moralizing. There wasn't anything. It was okay. You can be drafted for 2 years, apply to officers candidate school, be in for 3 years, be school for 6 years, work for defense for 6 years. My dad tried to get me to go to Canada to avoid the Vietnam War, which I think reflected his experience in treating wounded soldiers during World War II. But I don't know. That never appealed to me.
Did your brothers, were they?
Nobody in my family ended up. My younger brother was deferred because of some physical ailment, and may have been in needs. And my oldest brother went in as a doctor, but he wasn't shipped overseas, so he served, but he remained in this country. So none of us actually experienced combat, and
So
you
decided to go to apply for officer training.
I did, and so when I applied, I was a pretty severe stutterer at the time. I stuttered a whole lot, and so when I applied for officers candidate school, I checked on the form, stuttered, whatever, and this lieutenant colonel interviewed me, and this was in June after I graduated from college in May, and the lieutenant colonel told me, he said, he talked to me a lot more, and he told me that he was concerned that I would not be able to give an order under fire. In other words, if I was the officer over some soldiers and we were under fire, that I would not be able to get an order out telling them what we needed to do. He's, which I thought, quite frankly, was a valid concern. But what he also said was that he did not believe it was he did not believe that it was fair to me to refuse to take me into officers candidate school and to draft me as a buck private. So he said, I'm going to give you a one wise step. Basically that I'm going to defer you. One Y, there was L, which meant you could never serve in the service. And then there was one Y that basically you were deferred unless the country was falling apart So that was in June. I was in Memphis, and I called up Vanderbilt Law School and said, I've just been deferred from the service, and I thought my future years were mapped out. They're not anymore. Is there any way I could enter school in the fall? And they said, well, come see us. So I drove from Memphis to Nashville and walked into school and decided where to go. So I went to the dean's office and told them who I was and why I was there. And they gave me some kind of test, which I had no idea, and I really had no recall of the test. And they told me to take the LSAT on August the 3rd. Well, I still felt like this was, you know, I obviously hadn't applied, I hadn't done anything, and I just didn't really believe this was going to come about. But anyway, I took the LSAT on August the 3rd, and then at some point between August the 3rd and the 1st of September, they notified me I was admitted. I had done no preparation, and so, you know, I turned around and drive to Vanderbilt Law School, and again, I didn't know where to go, so I walked in the dean's office and I said who I was, and said, I don't have any place to live. And somebody in the dean's office told me that the undergraduates were not going to arrive for a couple of weeks, and they'd give me an undergraduate dorm for that couple of weeks, which would give me an opportunity to find some place to live. So anyway, that's the way I entered law school.
Wow, that's very interesting. So you entered Vanderbilt Law School, and did you ever consider any other law schools? Just, I mean, even though it was very interesting how you became a student at Vanderbilt Law, but
people in Memphis, I mean, I had, for example, a lawyer in Memphis that I knew pretty much growing up, named Marvin Goff, who write me a recommendation to Vanderbilt Law School. He did a great job. And he and other people encouraged me to go to law school at what's now the University of Memphis. But I considered it, but I just, you know, the University of Memphis Law School had not existed that long at that time, and
it didn't have what? I'm sorry.
Had not existed for a long period of time, and I just felt more comfortable going to Vanderbilt.
So tell me about Vanderbilt. Any professors or courses that stand out to you?
Well, the course I enjoyed the most was Hal Mayer with conflicts of law, and he was just, I mean, it sounds like a boring subject, but he made it great fun, and really the way he taught it was to teach how the law had progressed on conflicts of law. So rather than just teaching what the law was, he taught the progression of the law, and made it fascinating. I mean, I frankly thought, uh, with a couple of rare exceptions, but I thought the teachers were great. And yes, they were very good. And yes, so I didn't particularly love law school, but I certainly thought I got a very good education, and for the most part, the teachers made the coursework interesting and challenging.
Did you feel like that law school gave you a different way of thinking?
Oh, I think it definitely did. I think it was a very beneficial experience, and quite frankly, probably partially because of the way it came about, is that I had in my head that I might not practice law. In other words, I I I'd always understood that law school was beneficial for whatever you went into. So it wasn't like, I was going to law school because I wanted to be a lawyer, I wanted to practice law. Uh, it, it was, it just presented an opportunity to me, and a subject of interest.
What about your fellow students? Did you have?
I had a handful of friends, but I was not, quite frankly, which I think was not a good thing. I had been been such a center of attention when I was at Rhodes, particularly by last year, and I just wasn't interested in getting involved in extracurricular stuff in law school. So I really didn't make a lot of effort in it.
So let's just change subjects for just a moment and discuss a little bit about your, what I will call a current family.
Okay.
Who is your spouse?
My spouse is Beatrice Chan Hubbard.
All right. And where did you meet B?
Well, I met B at law school. She was not in law school, but she had a couple of roommates in law school, and she was in graduate school about statistics. And she went over to the law school they rented a house on Fairfax, and so she walked over to the law school to wait for roommates to get a ride to the house where she lived, and B just, she had time to kill, so just walked into her classroom as if she was a student and sat down and listened to a lecture. And she sat down beside me, and after the lecture, I tried to engage her. She was not very forthcoming, which she explained to me later was because she didn't. I mean, there were 4 women in my class.
How large was the class?
I don't know, 100,
100 or so?
130 or so. Yes, 4
So,
women. And
4 women.
so
Ugh.
B didn't want people to think that she was coming to the law school to pick up guys. So she was not friendly. B was my wife. And but anyway, I talked to her enough to get intrigued, and she's Chinese. She grew up in Hong Kong, and came over here for
Did
college.
she go to college in Hong Kong?
No, she went to college at Siena College, a girls' Catholic school in Memphis, Tennessee. She was in college in Memphis when I was at Rhodes.
Wow.
And the Siena College, I think, eventually became part of Christian Brothers College.
Okay. All right.
But at the time, it was a girls' college, and it was a great place for me. He would be the only student on campus during Christmas holidays and whatever, and the nuns just took care of her, and she loved the nuns, and I'm sure the nuns loved her.
Because everybody else had gone home.
Everybody else had gone home.
So was her family in Hong Kong?
Her family was in Hong Kong. She flew in from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, caught a Greyhound bus to Memphis, Tennessee, and the nuns picked her up at the Greyhound bus station in Memphis and took her to the college. And she went back to Hong Kong for the first time. It was after I graduated from law school, I think. We got married while I was in law school. But anyway, she had not been to Hong Kong 6 years or whatever. Yes.
So you all married.
We married in 1970.
Married in 1970 while you were in law school.
While I was in law school.
And was she still studying biostatistics?
No, she got that about statistics when we got married, and she really didn't enjoy it that much. And she went to work. She worked for employment security with the state.
Okay.
And then we had a child in October of 71. I graduated in 71, and we had our oldest child in October of 71.
Okay. So you married, you had a child in October of 71, and her name is
Cynthia.
And then you had another child.
Right. Well, and I'll put it
at some point.
Yes. I mean, what happened is that after I graduated from law school, B told me she wanted to go to law school. And so I was working for the state attorney general's office and had an income of about $12,000. And I said, well, go go to Vanderbilt Law School. And she said, well, we can't afford for me to go to Vanderbilt Law School. And my response was, we can't afford for you not to go to Vanderbilt Law School. And so she applied to law school and got in. And, you know, Cynthia had been born, so she had a child when she started law school. And then we decided we wanted a second child, which she had between her second and third year in law school. So
B's second and third year.
yes,
So she was pregnant while in law school.
yes, she was, which was interesting. I mean, even when she went to law school, there were not very many women in her class either. And I don't think the law school had experienced a pregnant student before. And, the teachers were they were very solicitous about her, to be sure that she wasn't too tired, to be sure that everything was fair. It was very sweet, quite frankly.
In the name of your second child,
Oh,
Christina, and obviously they're adults. Do you have Cynthia is a lawyer, correct?
Yes, Cynthia went to law school.
All right.
She went to Vanderbilt Law School.
Okay. And
Christina got a PhD in economics, and she teaches at Vanderbilt.
in economics. She teaches economics.
Yes, her economist specialized, and so her specialty was labor economics, and then a subspecialty was sort of healthcare related to labor, and so that's the area that she teaches. It really the economics and the healthcare system of this country and other countries.
Yes. So, had Cynthia, I believe you said that Cynthia for a time practiced with you.
Yes, she did. When she, yes, it runs in the family. When she graduated from law school, she was pregnant, and she told me she didn't want to look for a job when she was pregnant. And then after she had her first job, she told me she didn't want to look for a job while she had a baby. And the result was that she worked in my firm for, I don't know, a number of years, which was, of course, fun.
Do you have grandchildren?
I have 5 grandsons. 3 with Cynthia and 2 with Christine.
Right. And you have 1 in college, correct? And
Yes.
then the other 4 are in various stages of school.
Right.
Would you recommend law as a profession to them?
Oh yeah. I thought law. I feel like, I mean, as I said earlier, I didn't really thought about the practice of law. I was going to law school because I was interested and because I thought it would be beneficial in whatever I did. But I've thoroughly enjoyed the practice of law, and yes, I recommend it, and I think for me, law, there's just so many different things you can do with law, and so I mean, and government jobs, corporate jobs, the Wall Street law firm or the whatever. And I just think that there's you can find a niche that you enjoy.
All right, let's now discuss your career as a lawyer. So what year did you graduate from law school?
71.
71.
Yes.
And did you then took the bar exam
Yes.
here in Nashville?
Right.
And what was your first job?
Worked for the state attorney general's office.
All right. Tell us about the attorney general's office in that time. Like, do you recall who was the attorney general and number of lawyers, so forth?
Well, David Pack was the attorney general. He was sort of Ellington, Clement era. He had been commissioner of transportation. He may have been commissioner of something else too. But anyway, he was the attorney general. Dick Berry, who had been Speaker of the House, was his right-hand person. And we probably had maybe 15 lawyers in the Attorney General's office. So it was a small group of lawyers.
Where was the office?
When I joined the office, it was on the second and fourth floor of the Supreme Court building.
So the second floor.
The judges were on the third floor.
All the judges, even the Court of Appeals judges. Yeah. Okay. And then the fourth floor, which the windowless fourth floor.
Right. It was sort of renovated at some point before I joined the office.
Yeah, I think it had been an attic back in the day.
Yeah,
So there were 15 of you. And what was, do you recall your beginning salary?
$8,700
a year.
$9,600, $800 a month. Because frankly, I said 12,000 when they asked me about law school, but I actually wasn't making that much at the time. So when she talked to me, I was earning $9,600, and the tuition at Vanderbilt was over 3,000. But I just figured, somehow we'd make it work.
Was it in line with other professions, you think?
Oh, I think it was low.
Low.
Yeah.
All right. What did you do? What type of work did you do at the Attorney General's office when you first started?
Well, when I first started, because of my stuttering that I mentioned earlier, the office, and I sort of learned this later, but didn't want me in the courtroom. So they assigned me all of the regulatory boards. This was the boards of the Department of Health and the boards of Department of Insurance, and this included the environmental boards. So I had the professional boards, the environmental boards, and there were no staff attorneys at that time. So in representing these boards, I was a sole attorney for them. So I ended up trying the cases before them, advising them. Um, it was,
Did,
it was
did
a
they
challenge.
have frequent meetings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can imagine whether it's the medical board or the funeral director's board or the chiropractor board. I mean, it just, and then you had the water quality board, the air pollution board, the solid waste board, the hazardous waste. I mean, the issues were just, oh, and so I would just look from talking about solid waste to talking about the prescriptions of some doctor. And, it was,
That,
it was interesting.
yeah, that just seems, it just seems inconceivable to me.
Oh, it
That-
was overwhelming, quite frankly.
I mean, yeah, that,
And the idea of keeping me out of court, well, it did keep me out of court, but I was trying cases before the board, so my stuttering was all puts anyway, but whatever. I mean, it was great. I mean, there's nothing like just being thrown into the fire and figuring it out.
Right. So you did that for a while, and I would imagine, well, let me just backtrack just a second. In practicing before those boards and bringing cases, for lack of a better word, disciplinary actions against healthcare providers, against regulated entities at Commerce and Insurance,
Right.
and cases before the environmental boards, underground storage tanks,
Right.
whatever. There would be industry representatives, I assume, at those things.
Sure.
And then were there lawyers involved in the other disciplinary cases much, or were?
Oh, I mean, anytime we were, whether it's a doctor or the runoff from a chicken coop or whatever it was. I mean, they were always represented, so there were always attorneys on the other side. Yes.
And I assume that also you had to work out settlements.
Sure, and then even though the purpose was to keep me out of court, of course I went to court defending the actions of the board. So
you ended up for example, in Chancery Court,
yes,
if there was an appeal of a disciplinary hearing, let's say.
correct.
Wow. And as I say, that just seems overwhelming. Did you have other lawyers that helped at all?
No, not really. I will tell you a remembrance that I have. I guess it's accurate. So, I mean, I walk in the office. I'm told I'm the lawyer for all these entities. And Bart Durham worked for the Attorney General's office at the time. Bart Durham. And so I went into Bart's office and said, Bart, what do I do when one of them calls me on the phone and asks me a question? I don't know the laws of all these entities and whatever. And Bart told me, you tell him that's a good question. I need to look at it carefully, and I'll look at it and get back with you. And he said, that'll make them feel good that the question they asked was a legitimate question, and you bought time to try to figure out the answer. So that's the way I started.
That's a time-honored thing, isn't it? It is. So let's so time marched on. Did you continue with the AG?
Yes.
And how did that evolve? I mean, did your work change?
Yes, I mean, basically, it wasn't long to the AG, I think, decided trying to keep me out of court, which not a worthwhile deal. So at one time or another, I represented most of state government. At one point, they basically told me to give up the boards, and I kept the environmental boards because I had an interest there, and gave up the professional licensing boards, and I did criminal appeals, I did tax work, I think I did most of state government at one time or another. I kept the environmental boards and spent a lot of time on environmental issues.
So when you did criminal appeals, did you have a specific area that you went to, like East Tennessee, West Tennessee?
I think at the time I went everywhere, east, west, and middle.
Okay.
And was arguing like once a month. Is what I've got in my head. I don't know. But yeah, so and it was great. It was great because I would read the transcripts of what went on in the trial court. I would appear before the appellate court, the opinion, and gave me a perspective of trying case, because that's the perspective I had, and so I felt like it was great from a training standpoint.
And did you also appear before the Tennessee Supreme Court?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, any of those criminal cases that went up, and then I would call if there was a constitutional issue involving a statute or something. I think it went directly to the Supreme Court, and tax cases went directly from the trial court to the Supreme Court. So yes, I was appearing fairly frequently before this court.
And so I know that was a good experience.
Oh, yes. I mean, you know, and I got to know judges. So, yes, it was a good experience.
Okay. So as time came forward and attorney generals changed, did you receive promotions?
Yeah, I became a deputy attorney general. I presume that Ray Ashley promoted me to deputy, and I had sort of the civil. I didn't have all the civil. I didn't have, when I was promoted to deputy, I guess I was not still doing tax, so I did not have tax, did not have condemnation. I did not have criminal, but I had the rest of it under me. And then, I don't know,
Human
maybe
services and uh, children's services, and maybe that department wasn't separate at that time. But when we speak of condemnation, you mean transportation
I
in terms
meant
of
transportation,
tracing,
that was sort of,
yeah,
that was dealt with separately.
it's always been sort of a separate, because those trials have to take place in the community in which the land is located.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about interaction with colleagues, any interesting folks that you worked with?
Oh, yes. I mean, I loved the Attorney General's office. I loved the people I worked with. Yeah, I felt close to everyone there. And and the departments, I mean, for the most part, I mean, everybody was trying to do the right thing, and do good. And it was a rewarding experience.
A very collegial environment,
Very much.
helpful.
Yes, yes. I mean, I felt comfortable walking in anybody's office and asking questions or assistance or whatever. And everybody was happy to advise and help or whatever.
Eventually, you became what is known as chief deputy.
Right.
Tell me about how that came about.
Well, that was when Bill Leach was Attorney General, and Hayes Cooney had been the chief deputy, and Hayes resigned, and Bill Leach asked me to take over as chief deputy, and so Hayes and Bill Leach had not worked together that long, so I sort of became Bill Leach's right-hand person, I guess.
And I think you mentioned that your role as chief deputy was really sort of to run the office, if you will.
Yes, I mean,
the day-to-day.
I basically ran the office day to day. I mean, Bill Leach served on various boards, and if there were, I don't know if you remember, but there was a big scandal on the road contractors were conspiring on the bidding, and so Bill Leach got very much involved with addressing those road contractors and the litigation and the settling of the claims and whatever. And so he was off on that. So he was always sort of off on something. And so, basically I ran the office.
And you mentioned there were 15 lawyers when you started. By the time you became chief deputy, how many lawyers were there?
I think there were 55.
55. Wow. So that was quite growth.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And by that point, the divisions were more delineated, I assume.
Right.
So we had,
I don't know how many divisions. We may have had 5 deputies or something at the time.
so you had tax, criminal, general civil,
yeah,
transportation.
yes, yeah. Probably not right.
So the deputies reported to you, and
Right.
what about opinions? Was that a big part of the job?
Oh, opinions were, yes. It's okay to talk about this. You'll probably clear it with him first, but I won't. So when Andy Bennett was in law school, he worked for the Attorney General's office. And I realized that Andy was very good at analyzing issues. And so Andy and I had this secret. I didn't have time to review all the opinions. I was concerned that if assistant attorney generals knew that a clerk was reviewing their opinions and reporting to me where there were problems, that the assistants would think that's totally improper. So Andy reviewed all the opinions. Nobody knew it. I guess Bill knew it. But nobody in the office knew it. Andy pointed out the problems with me. I would go deal with the problems and the assistant, and it worked great because there were too many opinions for us at that time. The office not only provided opinions to the state government, they provided opinions to the local governments as well. So the volume was very high.
And I know when I was there, there was a great emphasis on getting out opinions in a timely manner, particularly opinions requested by legislators.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, the legislators had the final say regarding the budget.
Right.
So it was important to keep them happy.
Yeah. Yes, and we, I'll never forget. I can't remember the issue, but we issued an opinion, and I got a call from a district attorney that told me you're wrong, and he pointed out where we were wrong, and so I had to issue a retraction. And that was just, you just can't issue that volume of opinion without
The mistakes.
mistakes. That's right.
To try to understand and to know the breadth of the law with respect to what is happening. So, so you worked as the chief deputy during the tenure of Bill Leach, and Bill Leach left the Attorney General's office in what year?
1984, I think.
And who was appointed Attorney General?
Mike Cody.
And did you serve with Mike Cody at all?
I did. I was I was ready to leave the office by the time my Cody was appointed, but I felt like I owed it to Mike to at least stay long enough for him to sort of get oriented into the job and get to know everybody and whatever. So I stayed about 6 months while Mike was Attorney General, and then I went into private practice.
So you were at the Attorney General's office from 1971 to 1984
Yeah, basically, I think
or
I
85.
think I was at like January 185,
So that's 16 years.
13 years I was thinking. But
Well, yeah, my math is
right.
it's not my strong suit. Um, so you saw tremendous changes in that office.
Yes.
Could you describe some of those? It's very interesting to me, particularly as a person who's worked there for a number of years.
Well, I think, and uh, I think, I mean, in my mind, the importance of the office evolved as it expanded and addressed issues. So government exploded, and that office exploded with it. And when as chief deputy, I mean, my goal was to have a very professional office, and I felt like I fought with finance and administration because I insisted on paying the lawyers what I considered well, and at one point I told finance and administration, if you don't give me the money, I'm going to kick the cases out. You're going to have to hire private counsel. It's going to cost you a lot more money. And that's exactly what I did. I was not going to hire lawyers and not pay them well. So I started kicking cases out, and the government had to hire private lawyers to do it. And through that process, we got the funding so that we could have what I thought was a professional office for people who were paid decent wages and sufficient numbers to do the job.
Interesting. So you left the Attorney General's office in 1985, and what did you do next?
Bob Littleton and David Weed had been with the Attorney General's office. They had started a firm, I think about a year before, and I joined them.
And what type of work did you primarily do when you joined them?
I pretty much continued to do government work. I would do tax work. At the time, David Weed was the receiver for Cherokee Insurance Company, which was a huge receivership, and I used to assist him and and all the various issues coming out of that.
So when you say you continue to do government work, this is work that was given to you. You were representing the state,
I
or
did both. I
okay,
represented the state. The state at the time, I guess Lamar Alexander was governor, and the person we call Judge Inman was the governor's lawyer, and Judge Inman thought I had done a good job in representing the Alexander administration, and he, when I went in private practice,
now when you mentioned this, sort of takes us back a little bit. You mentioned Judge Inman. I think was his first name William.
I think that's
Bill.
correct.
And he was counsel to Governor Alexander, and when you were still with the Attorney General's office, what was your involvement with Judge Inman?
Well, the largest involvement interaction that I had with him was the prison conditions lawsuit, and we received the complaint, and I went and met with the governor's office and realized what a mess corrections was in. Nobody with the state could even tell you how many inmates there were in each prison. So we had no statistics. We really didn't know what the conditions were in these prisons. It was, it was very startling to me. But and so I ended up working with Judge Inman. The judge appointed a monitor for the prisons, and I advised Judge Inman that he needed to go with the monitor so that he could see whatever the monitor saw. And so that's my closeness to Judge Inman really came out of
And that was
litigation.
that was a result of a consent order, correct? I mean, there was a consent order in the prison conditions case, and then they appointed a monitor. Is that correct? Or
I can't remember.
okay, I think from my
I'm sure you
limited review, I think that's what happened. The Grubbs case was
Yes.
and so they appointed the monitor. So you gave excellent advice to Judge Inman, and because of that excellent advice, when you went into private practice,
Right.
he
would
was
He
somewhat indebted to you,
Right.
or it
right.
perhaps is one way to put it.
Right.
And
Right. And in fact, when I quit, and I'm sure he had it done, but I mean, Governor Alexander wrote me a letter saying that I understand you've been very good in helping my administration, whatever. So, yeah.
so you worked with Bob Littleton and,
Yes.
and David Weed, and did this work for a while, and then just kind of move forward with your private practice.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the one piece of litigation that was startling. That
In private practice?
in private practice, David, we, for whatever reason, thought I could handle everything. And so there was a Cherokee insurance company had paid, I don't know, a few $1 million in settlement over a racetrack in Florida where a jockey was injured and whatever. And the reinsurance carrier was Swiss Re, and which is a huge reinsurer. And Swiss Re denied coverage, which was going to have a huge impact upon the receivership. The way reinsurance operates is that disputes are settled through an arbitration process with three arbitrators. And so I flew up to New York to the World Trade Center to meet with the three arbitrators and the attorneys with Swiss Re. And to make a long story short, I won, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you, but afterwards, who they call the umpire, which is head arbitrator, came up to me and he said, when we had that meeting, I thought, oh, this is going to be a long, this lawyer from Nashville, Tennessee that doesn't know the reinsurance laws, whatever. And he said, you did a great job. So that's like, that's the one case that was the most
Rewarding.
I
Yeah.
guess. Yes.
Yeah. Well, sometimes when you, these people in places like New York
Right.
underestimate people at their peril, I think.
Well, and there was this the law firm representing the Swiss Re was like the law firm in New York for reinsurance, and they had a younger guy that traveled around and took depositions with me, and he came up to me afterwards and said, you came to New York and tried this case against the best in New York and you beat them all. No, that was so funny.
Way to go.
Know.
Way to go.
That was so nice of them.
Yeah. That's it makes it all worthwhile.
Yes.
So you move forward in your
right. I mean, basically, in the private practice, the lawyers sort of came and went, and Cynthia came to work for me, and we did a fair amount of receivership work, which a lot of times related to the managed care companies within care. In other words, the managed care companies would become insolvent. And so then we would represent them in receivership, and then I also ended up representing managed care companies within care that were not insolvent, and that became a large part of my practice.
Do you recall any lawyers or colleagues or business people that particularly stand out to you when you practiced?
Uh, well, yes, I don't know what it is. I mean, I became very close to, I mean, I represented uh, the TenCare managed care company that handled the behavior portion of TenCare, which uh, basically for children, uh, the behavioral health were for people up until they were 22 years of age. And it was very intensive. Um, Almost, I mean, it seemed to me that all the children were abused, sexually abused, whatever. And there was a psychiatrist that was a full-time employee of Magellan, and she would basically tell me what result we needed, and then I would try to get there. And Gordon Bonneman, who's a friend with the Justice Department, but we would lock up on how a child should be handled or whatever. And the head of the company was for the Tennessee, a guy named Chuck Klusner, and it was it was quite an experience, and I also feel like that my major in college, psychology, sort of steered me in this direction. But anyway, so that was very intensive. I also represented Sam Howard, who had a managed care company within care, and, which ended up becoming insolvent. And I represented him all the way up to the insolvency. But anyway, so it was pretty intensive.
Um,
And let me say, I mean, there were lawyers that, of course, I was always trying cases against other lawyers. I was always, and I mean, one in particular that was that was very talented was Charlie Warfield. Actually, I got to know Charlie when I was with the state, and Charlie represented. We had an environmental case over the West Tennessee rivers. I can't remember the name of it right now, but anyway, so there was a point in which, under the judge's order, if Charlie didn't file whatever it was, it would be waived. And Charlie was a felon, and I I called them up and I said, Charlie, you understand, if you don't file by this date, you've waived it. He obviously did not understand that. And I think that's what he always said, God, I really like the way you practice law. Because I don't know if I would have done it if I'd been in private practice. That would have been a different thing. But I saw the role of the government lawyer. We were lawyers for the public, and that I felt like we should operate on a different standard. So Charlie was great.
Yeah, sort of a grateful,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and that speaks, very highly of your character. How did, um, uh, have you been involved in politics at all, or national affairs, or local affairs, or state affairs?
Not really, although my position in the Attorney General threw me into politics in the legislature. And there were certain people in the legislature that Bill Leach, that they just saw red with each other. And so those individuals I had to deal with because Leach couldn't deal with them. And I mean, one of them was Lieutenant Governor Wilder. They just crossed up so that I had to be the person that dealt with Wilder. Another one was John Ford. It's been very difficult to deal with. But anyway, so there was, I guess, politics and government there, but generally I've not been political.
And subsequently, not really. One thing I think that you probably have seen is the advent of women into the profession.
Oh, it's been not only the advent of women, but minorities.
Mhm.
And I feel like, in fact, I said this on a call last night. I feel like the Nashville legal community is just, it's just no longer an issue, whether you're a minority or woman or whatever. I mean, I feel like the community has gotten to the point you wish all of society could be. And, yeah, I mean, when I first started practicing, you really didn't, have that many women. When I was chief deputy, we hired lots of women. And in fact, Patsy Cottrell and I got in an argument one time over whether we hired more men or women. But the fact of the matter was that back then, the opportunities for women were not as great. So I feel like that gave me the opportunity to hire him into the Attorney General's office. So, so yes, I mean, that was, and my goal was to be representative of the population of the state with minorities I never quite made it. But I wanted
think-
the office to reflect the community.
I think you probably have seen with respect to minority lawyers, lawyers who are minorities, lawyers who are women, the movement away from certain practice areas has occurred. I mean, for example, I would think that early on, most African American lawyers sort of came about in a civil rights era,
Right.
and that was sort of their practice, if you will.
Yes.
And more than likely, the lack of opportunities and so forth.
Right.
And then women, I think, were often placed in domestic relations,
Yes.
things dealing with children. But now we see that that's expanded.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's a very accurate observation.
One of the things, have you seen changes in office technology?
Oh, it's absolutely. So when I started at the Attorney General's office, I shared a secretary with a three-mate. I would dictate to the secretary, who in turn would take shorthand and type up the pleading or whatever else. And then the big technology was when I got a dictaphone. So I didn't have to have the secretary sitting in my office with me dictating to her. And so in the law firm, and I can't remember when this was, but the secretaries came to me and said, "We can't keep up. You've got to hire another secretary." And I said, "No, we're going to buy a computer for every lawyer and let them produce." And the secretary's response was, "You're going to spend all this money on computers and you're still going to have to hire a secretary." Well, I was amazed because I didn't know how, whether lawyers would adjust to typing their own pleading. They loved it. And it was great because it freed you up from that dependence upon the secretary. And so it was immediate. I mean, before then, if you were going to come in on the weekend, you'd have to schedule the secretary to come in on the weekend. So, yes, I mean, the freedom that computer gave you was huge. And of course, today, I mean, you just, you just send the pleading to the printer and it prints it off, and it's wonderful, and it is so much more efficient, and the technology of research. I mean, the General Digest. I hated the General Digest and going to the basement of the Vanderbilt Library to research in those books nationally, was just, and now being able to do that research on the computer, it has made the practice of law a much more enjoyable.
And I would say the advent of cell phones and so forth.
It's a plus and minus.
Yes.
I mean, when I had a family, I tried, when I was younger and had children at home, like that, still have a family. I tried to separate work from home, since I don't have any children or whatever living with me now. I have one cell phone number for work and home. I have one email address for work and personal. Everything's merged. And of course, whether I do the work at home or do the work at the office, but that really happened after my children left. How you, I would think it's much more difficult to keep that separation today.
Oh, yeah, I would think so. And depending on, bosses and so forth, who's going to email you at 3 a.m. and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
really
obviously clients and others.
Right.
I mean,
do you want to answer that phone when your kids playing on the basketball team? Do you want to get up and walk out of the stadium and take that call from whomever? And luckily, as I say, by the time that technology came around, I didn't have children, and of course, my wife was a lawyer, so she was very tolerant, and so there weren't issues.
Have you seen legislation impact your work? I mean, obviously, when you were the Attorney General's office, finding different things, but obviously with TennCare and
yes, and it has all through the years, and it continues to. I have clients that are affected that are regulated entities by the government, and of course, the legislation involving those regulated entities. So I get. Generally, what I try to do is work with the lobbyists and draft legislation or draft amendments or whatever. And I try not to actually become involved in lobbying, but sometimes I do. Generally, I try to work through the lobbyists, but sometimes I end up registering and doing lobbying, which for the most part, I'd rather just do the drafting and hands off.
What do you view? I mean, we're sort of reaching the end, I think, here, and you're continuing to practice. What do you view? How do you see lawyers and their role in society going forward? Do you think there'll always be a place for lawyers?
Well, yes. I mean, you've got the whole AI thing, whatever, and interestingly, I mean, years ago, one of the attorneys that worked for me in private practice that was technology oriented, he told me, he said, you know, this divorce work is ridiculous. All you gotta do is just gather all the results based upon, you know, certain criteria and figure out how it's gonna come out, and you can just, the computer can decide the result for everybody. And this was long before AI or anything, but I think I don't see, maybe I'm naive, but I really don't see AI affecting at least the kind of practice that I've done through the years. I don't see a computer being able to take over, whether it's dealing with 10-care or receiverships or whatever else. Maybe you know, as I say, maybe I just don't understand it. I mean, I'm sure there are portions of it that can be, but I think that's a good future for lawyers.
So at this stage, how would you sum up your career and
It's been wonderful. I mean, my career's been great. I mean, you know, like all lawyers, I mean, you're gonna run into lawyers and clients and whatever that are not good to work with. And I had this theory, and when it first went into private practice, and there'd be certain clients that they weren't happy with my style, because my style's not aggressive enough for them. And I was thinking, God, I mean, do I have to change? And I decided there has to be a match of the client and the lawyer. And if this client doesn't like my style, they need to go somewhere else, because we're never going to get along. And so, you know, if you can identify those clients early on, it's helpful. But overall, you know, dealing with other lawyers, dealing with clients, it's just been a very rewarding career, and I encourage my grandchildren to go into the field. I think my daughter, that's the economist, he says that lawyers take on the problems of their clients. And so she sees that as a negative. It's sort of a, you know, it is accurate. I mean, you do. You take your clients' problems and try to address it. But I've found it generally a very rewarding, good career.
I think that's a good place to end. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.